Welcome everyone to our Founders Lecture this evening. I'm Helen Jays, Headmistress at Manchester High School for Girls, and I'm delighted that the way in which we are marking our 148th birthday as a school is to welcome a special guest, Jasmin Paris, from the class of 2002. Known as, I'm sure you all know, an exceptional fell runner. She received worldwide attention after setting a new record in the 2019 Spine Race, finishing the 268 miles in just over 83 hours, the first woman to win the event and smashing previous records while expressing milk for her baby all at the same time. So we are really looking forward to hearing what she has to say this evening. I'm sure we will all be inspired by her story. If you have any questions for Jasmin that you would like her to answer at the end of her talk, please could you add them to the Q&A function. It would be great to have as many questions as we can to ask Jasmin at the end of her talk. So without further ado, thank you, Jasmin. I'll hand over to you now.
We'll start again. Thank you for the introduction. It's a real honour to be asked to speak this evening at the Founders Lecture for 2022. I had hoped that it would be in person. I was looking forward to seeing the school again after 20 years and maybe spotting some familiar faces. But I'm hoping that at least we'll get some interaction during the question and answer session at the end. I'm going to talk this evening about my experiences as a mountain ultra runner and how I balance my passion for the sport with a career and a young family. I hope that my story will inspire you to believe in yourself and to take up new challenges and potentially discover that you can do a little bit more than you ever believed possible. So, sorry. I do apologise, I just need to get into the next slide then. There we go. So, sorry about that. So this is, believe it or not, one of the only pictures I could find of myself in school uniform. I actually didn't have a mobile phone until I started university. So this is one of the few pictures, and I think this was taken on my first day of school in 1995, judging by the very excited expression and the shiny shoes. And really that was the first day of, this was really when I was embarking on a period of my life that I look back on with very happy memories. I think I thrived in the academic environment, and I thrived being given all those extracurricular opportunities that the school offered. In particular, I look back with very fond memories when I think of the lunch times that I spent in the school swimming pool with my best friends. So we would spend almost every day at lunchtime we would go swimming, and typically we would be in a huge rush afterwards to get back in time for lunchtime for the afternoon registration. I also remember very fondly the day that it snowed and we built a snowman outside the class windows. Just we were on the kind of, that was in year 7 when we were just on the bottom floor there beside the playing field, and we subsequently got bused home early because I lived in Hadfield, so I was kind of on the 691 bus, and we always left early when it was snowing. Most importantly, though, looking back on my school days, I remember the school teachers that inspired me with a real love of learning, and that has stayed with me throughout my life, and for that I'm hugely grateful. So I think I was about 10 when I decided that I wanted to be a vet, and that passion that stayed with me for the entirety of my secondary school education, and I am now a specialist small animal vet, and I work at the University of Edinburgh. So my patients are typically cats and dogs, but every so often I do get asked to do a procedure on another type of animal. So this is a young alpaca, so that's known as a cria. And here I am doing a bronchoscopy. So I have a flexible camera which has been passed down into the airways of this alpaca. And this alpaca had pneumonia. So what I was doing there was examining the airways, and I was getting a wash sample in order to be able to culture the bacteria that were involved, to be able to decide what antibiotics to use to treat that animal with. So that's the sort of thing that I kind of do in the clinic on a daily basis when I'm being a vet. But I also do some research work. So this is a quick summary of my PhD studies, and I was looking at the role of a protein called YTHDF2 in blood cell formation and in cancer. So very, very basic summary would be that in normal healthy humans and animals, your blood cells, both white blood cells and red blood cells, are produced in the bone marrow from stem cells. And in some situations, when something goes wrong, there's a mutation in one of those cells, and it starts to divide excessively, and that gives rise to cancer. And blood cancer is called leukemia. And basically, my work showed that if you inhibit this protein called YTHDF2, you can target the cancer cells, you can kill the cancer cells without affecting the normal blood stem cells. So that's a really exciting finding, and it's now potentially going to lead to new treatments for leukemia. So that's kind of what I've been doing in my research work. But that's all I'm going to really talk about in terms of work now. So going on to my home life. So I live with my husband, Conrad, and our dog, Moss, and our two children, Rowan and Bryn. So Rowan's 4 and Bryn is 18 months. He's a little boy. And we live just south of Edinburgh, about 30 minutes south of Edinburgh in the Borders. And I guess the reason that we've chosen to live in a kind of quite remote outdoor location is that the outdoors has always been really important for me. I can't really remember when I became a mountain runner. I think because it just sort of happened gradually, almost from the age when I learned to walk. These two pictures are of they were taken when my parents walked with me across the Andes when I was just a baby, I think about age 1, and we wild camped under the stars. And there's my dad crossing a river that my mum hates this photo. She always gets very worried when she sees it. But yeah, so that's where it all started, right back then when we used to go hiking with my parents, and we continued to hike during my childhood. Every weekend, we would go on walking trips, and then we would also go on camping trips and sleep out under the stars. And that sort of continued throughout my childhood. All this time spent outside. And when I was a teenager, I spent most of my time at the stables. This is my horse Tia, and I think those days with Tia taught me a lot about friendship. They also taught me about hard work and responsibility, and they also taught me a lot about being time efficient. I certainly learned to do most of my homework on the school bus in order to make time to spend at the stables once I was at home. So yeah, there might be others of you that relate to that as well. So once I was in my early 20s, my brother and I started going on hiking trips on our own in the mountains, and we would typically sort of take the kit that we needed for 7 to 10 days, and we would take all the provisions we needed, and we would wild camp under the stars. And our aim was always to see as few people as possible, so we tended to choose the most remote places that we could visit. And I think those sort of experiences in the mountains really sort of fueled me with not only with a kind of passion, with a love for them, but with the sort of experiences with which to endure subsequent hardships on the ultra races that I now run. So I didn't start running in sort of an official capacity till I left university, and I was working as a new graduate small animal vet in Glossop, and colleague suggested to me that I go along to a local fell race. And I went along. It was just, I think, about 4 miles and about 400 meters of ascent, and I went along in trainers. I spent a lot of the time on my bottom falling over because I had no grip, but I loved it, and I really, I really felt at home with these people that were so sort of, they were so in love with the outdoors, and they thought it was fun to sort of this chaotic sort of scramble up and down boggy hillsides. These were people, like-minded people, and so I sort of really sort of fell in love with the sport at that point. I joined a local club, and I started going out for runs with those teammates. And I quickly discovered that I liked running longer, rougher races most of all. So I sort of quickly, as I say, sort of switched to doing almost ultra running distances. And in actually sort of 2012, 13, 14, I started to get a little bit better at that. And then in 2015, I for the first time won the British Fell Running Championships. And I also competed in a race called the Dragon's Back Race, which is a 5-day race along the Montane Spine of Wales. And the picture on the right there was actually published in The Guardian at the time, because I think it's a good picture of the race. The right bottom picture there, and I was able to win that race. I was first lady and second overall, so I guess that was probably my first big breakthrough as a runner. So the following year, I took on a new challenge, and I ran the 3 UK fell running rounds. So these are 24-hour challenges. The aim is most people would do them with the aim of completing it in 24 hours. And they're all typically around 100 kilometers long, and they have about 8,000 meters of ascent, so roughly equivalent of climbing Everest. There's one in the Lake District called the Bob Graham, there's one in Wales called the Paddy Buckley, and there's one in Scotland called the Charlie Ramsey Round. And in 2016 in the summer, I ran the 3 of these rounds, and in one season, and broke the ladies' records for all 3. And in the Scottish round, I actually broke the overall record, which was exciting, just exciting to show the men how it was done, I guess, at the time. So the same summer, I also did the Extreme Skyrunning series, and that included a race in Glencoe, Scotland, and a race in Norway. So skyrunning is a sort of, I think of it a bit like a sort of adventure playground for adults. It's a bit of a cross between mountain climbing and running, sort of scrambling. And as you can see there, it does kind of involve in places fairly technical terrain. I really love it. It really suits me down to the ground. So I was really excited to win that series as well. So at the end of that year, I sort of felt that I felt really pleased with what I'd done, but there was maybe a little bit of pressure, expectation about what I was going to do next. But what I did do next was to have a baby. So I was lucky enough to be able to continue running during my pregnancy. This was with my daughter, my first baby. The picture on the left there is of me doing one of these 2-day mountain marathon events with my mum. And we did that when I was 7 months pregnant. So you have to sleep in a tent at the midway camp for these events, and you typically carry a very small tent, so you don't have to carry very much kit. So it was a bit of a squeeze with the 2 of us and the bump in the tent as well. And then the picture on the right there is of me doing a race 10 days before my daughter was born. There was just an out and back race to the top of that hill there. It's a hill race called Tinto, and I think the marshals at that race were quite pleased to see the back of me. They weren't keen on the idea of delivering a baby at the summit of that race, but it was all good. So that was 10 days before she was born, and yeah, that's after she was born, obviously. So everything was pretty smooth in terms of the birth. She was born backwards. She was born breech, and we didn't know she was going to be breech, but it worked out fine in the end. And I was back running pretty quickly. So the picture on the left there is sort of 4.5 months after she was born, and that was the first British Championship race. It was really foggy that day. Lots of people got lost, and I sort of inadvertently won the race, partly I think by luck. But that was a good kind of start back to the season. The picture in the middle there is once my daughter was 6 months old, I could start running with her in the buggy. So that was us doing some running together. And the picture on the right there is one of these 2-day mountain marathons, and she was just 6 months, so she was still breastfeeding a lot. And I knew that I couldn't leave her for the weekend. So my mum carried her into the midway camp, and she slept there with us. I fed her overnight, and then my mum carried her out again the next day. So I really do have incredible support for the running that I do and the racing that I do. So that summer after my daughter was born, I completed the British Championships and managed to win the British Championships for the second time. So I was really proud of that, just having come back after having a baby. At the same time that I knew that I wasn't really running quite at the level that had been before I had my child, and I really wanted to sort of get back to that sort of level of competing. I also was really struggling with motivation. So at this point, it was now the autumn. I wasn't sleeping very much at night because my daughter didn't sleep very much at night, and I was struggling to sort of get up at 5 a.m. to train before work in the dark and the wind and the rain. So I signed up for a race that previously I'd said I was never going to run. So this is the Montane Spine Race. I previously described this as a crazy race and said, why would you be so silly as to want to run that? It just looks like misery. But I guess part of me must have all the time been thinking, could I do it? And maybe that sort of slowly grew in me, that question. It's always exciting to do a new challenge when you don't really know if you can complete it, and the Montane Spine definitely ticked that box. So to explain, this is a race that starts in Edale in the south, which is not actually not that far from Manchester High. So I imagine most of you probably will have visited it. And it runs along the Pennine Way north to Kirk Yetholm, which is just on the Scottish border. The race in total is 268 miles long, and it's a non-stop race. So it's from the moment the clock starts on the Sunday morning to the moment you cross the finish line, you are racing, which means that sleep becomes really tactical. So the more you sleep, obviously, the more you'll get overtaken by people if you're just sleeping at a checkpoint. Equally, if you don't sleep, then at some point you probably will just burn out and drop out altogether. So it is definitely a tactical dilemma. In addition, you have to navigate. So roughly 2/3 of this race will be run in the darkness, given that it's run in mid-January and it's only sort of light between 8 and 4 at that point. So you have to navigate, and most of it's in the dark. You also have to carry all your kit. So you're actually expected, you have to carry a sleeping bag, a shelter, cooking equipment, all the food that you're going to require, and obviously spare clothes, head torch, that sort of thing. So it's a pretty big undertaking. There's 5 checkpoints along the route where you can get a hot meal, and you can also resupply your food provisions from a drop bag that the organisers move between checkpoints for you. So I signed up to this race and I started training. And actually, it was a really good motivation to train, knowing that I was going to do this in January, because I thought if I didn't train, then it was just going to be even more painful than it would be otherwise. So it did inspire me to get out of bed in the mornings. The pictures on the right there are of a race I ran in December called the Cheviot Goats. That was just 50 miles in the Cheviots, but it was kind of good training on that terrain. And the picture on the left there is at the cottage in the Czech Republic. I'm half Czech, so we spend holidays quite often there as well. So typically my training during the week, I trained roughly an hour to an hour and a half every day during the weekdays, and then at the weekends typically up to 5 or 6 hours. I would always train at 5 a.m, which meant that even at weekends I would be back by sort of mid-morning, so that I didn't sort of spend the whole weekend away from my family, because obviously I wanted to spend time with my daughter. I trained and gradually increased the weight of the pack that I was carrying training. So when I actually raced the race, I was carrying a weight of about 6 kilos. So I kind of gradually accustomed myself to that. And I also increased the volume of mileage that I was training. So initially I was running about 50 miles a week, and by New Year, I was running about 100 miles a week. So that's the kind of the training that I was doing in preparation for this race. So yeah, so that was sort of kind of fitness wise, I felt pretty good, but I had some concerns, and they were actually more from the sort of mental point of view. Firstly, I had never been away from my daughter for more than a single night before, so I found that quite intimidating, the idea of being away from her for that long, and it certainly was a motivator to get to the finish line. The other thing that I was worried about was the fact that I was still breastfeeding her, so my plan had been to have her weaned before the race started. Unfortunately, she was a bit poorly over Christmas, and that didn't work out. So in the end, I just had to pack a breast pump into my drop bag and plan to express milk at the aid stations, at the checkpoints along the way. I knew that my daughter would be fine because she had some milk expressed in the freezer at home, and to be honest, she was never really bothered when I wasn't there anyway, and it was more of a sort of comfort thing. But I knew that I couldn't go without expressing milk for 4 days or more. So I carried a breast pump, and I added the kind of the expressing milk to my checkpoint to-do list. So knowing that I was going to be sleep deprived at the checkpoints, I sort of laminated this little checklist of things that I needed to do each time I passed through a checkpoint, and that included getting new head torch batteries, new GPS batteries, new food and water, getting dry socks because you have to look after your feet on a race like this, and charging my phone, swapping my map, because obviously you cover more than one map in that sort of distance. So that the breast pump was added to the checkpoint to-do list. So when the race started, I sort of felt pretty ready, and this was us on the first day, crossing over Bleaklow and then over kind of Black Hill. I think that photo is on the left there. So it doesn't look like it, but the weather on the first day wasn't great. It was really windy, and it was sort of mostly a headwind. So we were running into a strong wind, which definitely made things harder. At the start, we obviously, there you can see I'm still in quite a good company. There's quite a few people around, but by the end of the first day, there were just 3 of us at the front of the race, and it was me and the previous 2 race winners. And we actually ran together through the first night. So this is us 24 hours into the race. So the first night we didn't sleep at all. There's not much point really sleeping the first night in a multi-day race like this, because you're not really tired enough yet to sleep, and you're kind of too excited, and also the other competitors will be catching you up, and then they sort of disturb you even if you did try to sleep. So we just raced right through the first night. We didn't really stop at all. We just stopped at the first checkpoint and ate the meal there, and I expressed some milk, which did hold me up a little bit of time. It took me a little while to catch these 2 back up again after that, but that was really the only time that sort of expressing the milk took me with any sort of disadvantage time wise for me, I think, at that first checkpoint. So this is us now. We're now on the kind of final section, about probably now about 90 miles into the race, on 24 hours into the race, and we're climbing over towards Hawes. At this point, the person on the right there in the red is Ian Keith, and the person in the middle is Eugenie Rosselot. So at that second checkpoint, about 100 miles in, Ian Keith dropped back a little bit, and it was just me and Eugenie running together after that. So Eugenie is quite a character. He is Catalan, and he doesn't speak much English. So we ran together for about 200 miles of this race, but there was very, very little conversation. I speak a bit of Spanish, but I'm not sure how much he understood. He sort of didn't, as I said occasional sort of words, but mostly we ran in companionable silence. He relied on me. I must say he relied on me to do most of the nav, which got a little bit draining. Occasionally he would shout out left or right, kind of very enthusiastically throwing his arms out, but quite often you would get the 2 muddled up, so he might like throw his right arm out and shout left, or vice versa. So it wasn't very helpful really in terms of navigation. But it was nice to have company. It was nice to have someone to sort of share the really special moments, like the sunrises and yeah, the moments where something was really beautiful, or where somebody had left, you know, a box of chocolate biscuits below a bridge with a sign saying "Go Spine Racers," that sort of thing. You know, those little moments of joy. It was nice to have someone to share them with. So we ran through, and the second night. So the second night we did sleep for about 2.5 hours in, and that was in Middleton. And then we continued on. So this is us now on the third day, and we're nearing the 4th checkpoint. So it's almost 200 miles into this race. And you can see Eugenie always played to the camera. You can see he's always either waving to the camera or making sort of a funny sign or funny expression. And I was pretty focused on just getting to the next checkpoint, or getting the job done. So this was us coming into the checkpoint, as I say, on the 3rd day. So by this point we'd been running for 3 days, 2 nights, and we'd slept for about 2.5 hours. And at this checkpoint, Eugenie stopped to have, we both stopped to have a meal, and Eugenie had a massage and sort of fell asleep as well in that process. And at that point I sort of recognized that was my opportunity to go. So it was my opportunity to try and get away, because I tried to get away from him early in the race actually, and at that point I had managed to open a little lead, but then he sort of caught me on a descent, and at which point I think he really sort of pushed himself hard to catch me that time on the descent, and I think he probably trashed his legs a little bit, and I wasn't really willing to take that risk. So that first time I let him catch me, but this time I saw that this was a real opportunity to get away. So I ate my meal. I expressed a bit of breast milk, packed all my stuff up, and set off running. And this was he slept for about 1.5 hours, and during that time I knew that this had about 1.5 hours of daylight. He must have set off just as it sort of got dark, and I opened a gap of about 8 kilometers, and that was going as fast as I could after having run around 200 miles. So when he sort of woke up and was ready to go, he was really chasing. He really wanted to catch me back up again, but I equally wanted to stay away. I knew that if Eugenie did catch me up again, I would find it very hard to drop him, and I sort of was a bit worried that he was going to hang on to me till the end of the race and then just disappear. So I was really keen to sort of get away, run my own race, and let him do his own navigation. So I had all the incentive to stay away, but he was definitely trying to catch. So what followed was quite an exciting night of racing, if you can call it exciting, once we were, you know, having run 200 miles and not really moving that fast anymore. For us it felt pretty exciting. So we were running but it got dark quite quickly, and we had there's a sort of supporters all the way along this race, and there's a tracker when you run this race, and so the general public can follow it. And actually when we were running the Spine, I think as the race went on, and maybe because I was a woman leading the race, more and more people started to follow the race, and it sort of developed this following on social media that sort of snowballed, and I think as our sort of little dots moved northwards on the map on that night, that my final night of racing, that everybody was sort of, there was lots of people following the dots at that point. And I managed to sort of maintain that sort of gap back to Eugenie of an hour or an hour and a half, all the way to the final checkpoint 5, which I reached in the early hours of Wednesday morning. So at that point, I had now been running for 3 days, most of 3 nights, and had only slept for 2.5 hours. And really everything in me was saying, you need to stop and sleep. But at that point, I knew that if I did stop and sleep, Eugenie was going to catch me and probably stay with me. So I kind of took a risk. I made a gamble, and I decided that I was going to keep running at that point, keep racing, yeah, just risk the consequences of not having any sleep. And certainly during that last night, I could really tell that I hadn't slept. So I started to have hallucinations. I could see every time I looked at anything, kind of like basically the rocks and trees sort of started to take on the shapes of animals. So the stones that I was running along on the Pennine Way, I kept seeing horses' heads in those, and then I saw a tree doing yoga, and then it was sort of doing the downwards dog position, and then it changed to being a kind of a deer that was sort of rubbing its antlers to get rid of its antlers. I saw a pig running in the heather. I saw sort of builders by the side of the path in the most sort of remote places doing sort of, it looked a bit like aerobics they were doing or something. Like, it was really, really strange. And weirdly, I wasn't very frightened. I sort of knew that it couldn't be real, and in some ways it was mildly entertaining. But as I say, everything you look at sort of starts to move. Yeah, disconcerting, but wasn't too frightening. I also was falling asleep on my feet, so occasionally I would trip and only come to as I was almost sort of hitting the ground, and I took to doing things to keep myself awake. So I was singing out loud. I was singing the Spice Girls, the few words I still remember of the songs from kind of my younger days, and I was singing the Spice Girls, and I started talking to myself as well. So I found it quite comforting, hearing a friendly voice telling myself to like put on clothes or eat some sweets or whatever it was. So that was kind of that final night. So what I'm going to do shortly, I'm just going to show you another picture there. So as I say, on that final night, I got to the checkpoint 5 and decided that I should run on. I shouldn't wait for I shouldn't go to sleep there in case Eugenie caught me. So I'm just going to show you a roughly 5-minute video of that kind of last section of the spine, with sort of Eugenie involved in as well. So you'll see Ian Keith as well, who was just a bit behind us. He features in it as well. So hopefully this will work. So. Nice. Let's go and finish this off. Yeah. Thanks very much. No, she's gone.
Oh,
gone.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ero in the part. Fanta.
Yeah.
Ian.
And before Greenhead.
Wow.
Everything's starting to hurt now, but it's not that far anymore. Just when I get to the finish, I'll have my little girl there.
That must be a big motivator.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But now it's gorgeous. Now it's a really beautiful morning, so I just get on and chip away at it, and it's not that fast. Yeah, it's been everything that I thought it was going to be. I think some of it's type 2 fun is what I'm trying to say. But I was pretty much falling asleep as I was walking along before.
Well, the course is running the fastest I've ever seen it. The race is interesting, that's for sure. I presume, I mean, the last I saw, Jasmin was going to smash the absolute record, never mind the women's record. She should absolutely smash it. You can see what time she does.
I think, well, I did the Cheviot race at the start of December, so I remember it quite well from that because it's this section. It's really nice up there, but and it's going to be a beautiful day, but it'll probably be really windy and cold. It's probably going to feel hard.
Everyone, the 2019 Montane Spine Race.
So, yeah. Sorry. So that was so yeah, I finished in 83 hours 12 minutes, which was I think about 12 hours faster than the course record. And actually the next man didn't finish till 15 hours later, because Eugenie, who was racing about two or 3 hours behind me, got to sort of 6 kilometers before the finish and had to be rescued because he got hypothermic. It was really cold on the last day, and when you're that tired, you're really kind of on the edge of what you're capable of. I think I was wearing like 5 layers or 6 layers on my top and 3 pairs of trousers when I finished the race. It's just really hard to keep warm when it's sort of sub-zero temperature and you've been racing for 4 days. So yeah, finished in 3.5 days, and it was so good to see my daughter again and my family, my husband and my daughter. My daughter was a bit suspicious when she first saw me. You probably saw on the video there, and she sort of looked at me. I was a bit worried that she might cry actually in front of all those reporters, which would have been embarrassing, but I think it was because I was kind of smelt bad. I was wearing all black, so once I'd had a shower, she was glad to see mummy back again. So I guess kind of a few closing remarks on the spine. It was an incredible experience. I don't think I was prepared for the aftermath in terms of the media attention and sort of the chaos, the whirlwind of activity that followed in terms of interviews and so on. I guess I do feel that it's has had very big upsides as well. I'm really proud to have been able to inspire some people. I certainly have had lots of messages, personal messages from people telling me that they've been inspired or their children have been inspired, and I feel like that's a huge privilege and an honour to be in that position. And I'm proud to be able to do that. I'm proud to be able to kind of promote women in sport, the subject of breastfeeding, which was discussed a lot afterwards as well. And I genuinely think this doesn't apply just to women. I really think that I hope that this is an example of a normal person just doing, trying and believing in themselves and really sort of doing more than they believed they were capable of. So I'll just say a few more comments. So I after the spine race, I followed that with having my second baby, Bryn, and I'm now back to running. So this summer I ran a 24-hour Monroe challenge. So I basically ran as many Munros as I could in 24 hours, and I set a ladies record of 29 Munros in that time. So that was kind of my project for this summer. This is a picture of me at sunrise on that challenge, and I do have kind of big plans for the coming year as well, which are exciting. So I'm just going to leave you with some kind of final closing thoughts, and these relate to, I guess, my thoughts about how the role that sport plays in my life, but equally this could apply to art or music or whatever it is that you're passionate about. So I'll turn the light on in a minute. So firstly, running for me is really important for my well-being. I know that especially now that I'm a mum, it's my only me time. It's the time that it gives me sort of headspace. It's in a way my sort of form of mindfulness. It makes me happy. It makes me a better mum, and I think it makes me better able to cope with the kind of stresses of a highly demanding career, particularly in the clinical setting. So firstly, as I say, I think it's important to have something that you do outside of work that is for you, that allows you to just have some space and be yourself. And in my case, that's running in the mountains. And that leads on to my next point. I think it's really important that you do what you're passionate about, and that applies to work and it applies to your life outside work as well. If you do a job that you love, that you're passionate about, then genuinely it's so much easier. Going to work ceases to be a chore in that setting. So yeah, as I say, do what you're passionate about, and I think life gets much easier, and you'll manage to find time to do those things because you'll really want to. Thirdly, people. So surround yourself. The people that surround you will influence you. Let them support you. They want to guide you, want to support you, and sort of really sort of draw from that, and equally be kind and give back. Give back and sort of let people inspire you, and equally aim to inspire others as well. And finally, a kind of final closing point. Perseverance. I genuinely believe that if you want something badly enough, and if you're really willing to persevere and to try hard and to believe in yourself, then I think you'll be really surprised at how much you can achieve. And certainly that was the case for me with the spine race and many other adventures that I've had so far. So I'm going to close with that. And I'll open this to any questions. It's been an honour to speak to you, and thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah, that's me.
Thank you. Absolutely incredible. Yeah, absolutely in awe of those achievements, and also so great to hear those lessons that you've told, that you've learned from sport and those incredible achievements. There are quite a few questions coming through. If anybody has got any questions, please do continue to ask them. There are a few relating to how you cope during the race. There's one question came through: how far did the sleep deprivation of early motherhood help you sustain yourself during the race? And also, can you just explain a bit how you cope with the navigation at the same time? One thing I was intrigued by is actually how you manage the running and the racing and the focus and keeping yourself awake and the navigation. So I wonder if you could just talk about those two elements. Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, great questions. So in terms of the sleep deprivation, I do think that actually it helped not being used to sleeping. So for me, it was quite normal to be woken up like every couple of hours and going right up until the race. So I think my body was just primed already to be sleep deprived, so it wasn't as bothered. So that's the first thing. And probably I'd sort of developed better coping strategies for kind of keeping myself awake and sort of functioning on lack of sleep. In terms of navigation, so I generally, as a fell runner, would be, I'd say I'm quite comfortable using just a map and a compass, and that's the way I would normally run races. But on this race, I guess partly because of the kind of challenge it is and the fact that you're running a lot of it in the dark on your own, you have to carry a GPS. So that's really helpful in terms of kind of, you have like a little map on the GPS, and it's that really helpful in terms of working out where you are and kind of showing you where you're going. But you do obviously still have to sort of be looking at that. I definitely found there were a few points during the race on the last day on the Cheviots, a couple of points where I sort of had a micro sleep and I sort of fell asleep while I was walking along, and then I would wake up and I would, for a moment, I'd be really confused, like I couldn't remember where I was or what I was doing, and then I would remember, and then I would say to myself, how long have I been asleep for, and am I even on the race route anymore? You know, it's a really weird feeling, but clearly they were just micro sleeps, so I hadn't wandered off course, but disconcerting for sure. That's me. Yeah. Over to you.
Great, thank you. So much of what you said really struck home in terms of the mental and the grueling nature of the mental battles you must have faced during that race. And a couple of questions have come in about that. So there was the first question, which was, do you have any particular strategies you would recommend to overcome the mental battles you face during a grueling run, and perhaps not just listening to the Spice Girls, I'm not sure. And the other one was, when was the darkest place you were mentally during that race? So maybe something about the mental challenges you faced during the spine race. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one because obviously I got tireder as obviously I must have been tireder as the race went on, and certainly by the end I was having the hallucinations, which kind of indicate that. But for me, it was almost the first night that felt the worst, and I think it was because it was sort of that break from being with my daughter all the time to being away from her and not being there for bedtime. I really felt that kind of that first night, and after that it was like I was immersed in the race. I'd sort of switched to race mode, and it was suddenly much easier to sort of to forget about home and in a way. At the same time, I think the sort of darkest points, the kind of strategies I used mentally, I thought about getting back to my family. I imagined what I was going to do with them when I got back. Like I imagined that, about going swimming and just going to a cafe or having, tea with, giving my daughter a hug, little things like that. And I also just sort of visualized the things that she was doing at that point, like when she would sort of lean over and inspect a flower or something, those kind of little things that toddlers do that made me happy. I just tried to think of things like that to sort of keep me going. So those were kind of my mental. But honestly, in some ways, as I say, it got easier as the race went on, partly because I was getting closer to her, and partly because I was really racing. Like that last night with Eugenie, I was like properly in race mode. I mean, I am competitive, so I wanted to win, so that really helped. Yep, so that's I think that's probably what I'd say, unless hopefully I've answered it. The question.
Yeah, fantastic, brilliant, thank you. There's a question about your physiology here. How does your physiology adapt to these marathon physical efforts, or is there anything in your pre-running bodily physiology that made you well suited to such feats? That's a question. Over to you.
Who knows? I guess I definitely always had. Like I've noticed that I'm quite good at stamina, like I've got quite good stamina, and I noticed that even sort of at university I did lots of outdoor stuff with the outdoor club, and generally I would sort of be the one that was still kind of raring to go at the end of the day. They used to call me the Duracell bunny at university, so I guess that sort of suggests that it's been a feature I've had. I know my mum was like that as well, so probably it's sort of there is something genetic. In general, there's some evidence to suggest that maybe women are better at doing kind of long distance events, or become, I guess, maybe the gap between men and women in terms of physiology narrows when it comes to long distance events. And there's like various arguments for that, which include kind of the body fat distribution of female runners, better suited maybe. I think personally that women are maybe a little bit better at kind of multitasking all the things that need to be bought, that you need to consider when you're running a multi-day race in terms of looking after yourself and navigating and the various other features. So in terms of my physiology, I'm not sure what it is, but I have noticed that I'm reasonably good at long distance things. Yeah. I think I'm quite good at eating when you do these things, and actually that is a massive part of doing ultra things, is eating. So that probably helps as well. That's all I have to say. Yep, so over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. A practical question from a colleague at school who is a passionate runner. How did you prevent blisters when running for that amount of miles, for 268 miles?
So blisters are an interesting question, because that's something that really clearly plagues the spine runners. Before this race happened, I joined like the Facebook group for this race, and there were discussions like months in advance about people's blister tactics, and I had nothing, like no tactics whatsoever. I had nothing planned, and actually I didn't really have. I had one blister on each foot, and it was between the big toe and like the next toe. I mean, it was a big blister, and it happened where the kind of grit got between the big toe and the next toe, but that was it. So I didn't really have problems in terms of my shoes. It was just that bit where the grit got in. I actually used that blister because at one point I was really falling asleep, and I just decided that I'd wake myself up by kind of squeezing that. So I trod really hard on the blister. Yeah, but after that I couldn't walk. You know, I had to live. I was really sort of hopping for a good sort of 50 meters after that. But it did wake me up. So that was my only blister, my only big real blister issue. And so I was lucky. I'm not sure why it is that I don't have blister problems. Maybe a lot of time spent walking barefoot as a child, possibly shoes that fit, just being used to doing lots of mileage. Maybe my feet had grown accustomed to it. So that's it. Over to you. Yep.
Yeah, brilliant. Really interesting way to use a blister to keep going. There's lots here about what your next challenge will be. I mean, there are loads of other questions, but just reading through, there are a few questions just asking what your own next challenge will be.
So in terms of kind of things that I can talk about, I'm running the UTMB, which is the Ultra Tour of Mont Blanc, which is like, I guess it's the Olympics of trail running. It's the big race, the big mountain ultra race around Mont Blanc. So anybody that does running will know that race. So I'm gonna race that in September. And before that, I have some other plans, but I can't really talk about them very much at the moment. I also probably will try and get on I've raced for Scotland and for GB before, Great Britain, but I'd quite like to try and get back on the team for Great Britain for this summer for the European Champs. So I'll run the selection race for that as well. So that's me. Back to you.
Thank you, brilliant. A few questions, I've written one down actually, one's come up on the chat also, about how you recover physically from that endurance event. I mean, you looked completely fine at the end of that race, but how do you recover after it? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, how do you recover? I think that's another thing actually I guess I've been fairly good at in the past, not through any kind of good thing that I've done, just I think maybe again it's a physiology thing. What I would say is that after the spine I struggled more with recovery, and I don't even think it was so much the race. I think it was more the aftermath, like all the interviews I did. Like I was getting up at 6 a.m. and things to do interviews on the other side of the world type thing. I think that sort of, I just needed to spend a few days sleeping rather than kind of doing lots of media stuff. It was difficult to say no. I find it very difficult to say no. So I think that was the kind of big problem in terms of recovery after the spine, was not the physical thing, it was as much the kind of mental side of it. But generally in terms of recovery, I guess when I'm feeling like I'm getting quite tired towards the end of the season, I tend to start doing more swimming than running. So I swim outdoors as well. So I think that's kind of a good way to sort of keep some fitness while not loading my joints as much. I do think that once you're kind of towards the latter half of the season, then you can to some extent just sort of maintain your fitness between races if you're racing reasonably frequently, rather than kind of doing big training blocks. So it's just a case of trying to kind of carry it over. Other things, I mean, we eat home cooked food, like a well balanced diet, cooked from scratch, and I like fruit and veg, and brown bread and all that sort of stuff, and I think it helps to sort of eat well. There's plenty of runners that don't eat very well, but or don't eat enough. And I don't think that, whilst that might have been a problem earlier in my life, it's certainly not a problem now. So I like food a lot, so that helps as well, I think. Yeah, that's back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. There is a question about food here, actually. What did you eat at the breaks, and anything in between official breaks? How did you keep going?
Yeah, so the breaks, so on the spine race, it's good because the checkpoints have really good food. The volunteers sort of cook proper meals, and they're the best thing. Like the lasagna I had at checkpoint 4 on the spine race, still like amongst my top meals of my life, probably just because, you know, it's just so good to have all that kind of fat at that point. But yeah, so the meals, you know, they had proper meals at the checkpoints, and they were really the best food that I ate on the race. Between times, you obviously don't want to carry too heavy food, so you're carrying food that you're trying, well, I was trying to carry food that was light, but would have lots of calories, but also that you would want to eat. So the problem is that when you run ultra races, I can usually manage to eat for like the first day quite happily, and after that you sort of start to go off food, and especially if you're missing sleep. So I ate a lot of chocolate bars on the spine because I found I could still eat those. I have like nuts, and because they're really energy dense as well, but dry stuff does start to get quite difficult to swallow. So I had pizza, I had frozen pizza in my drop bag, cheese. So those are kind of the snacks that I ate between times. As I said, quite a lot of chocolate. That's back to you.
Thank you. Just got a few more questions for you. A couple of first are quite technical ones. So firstly, is there a shorter 108-mile version of the spine race? That was the first one. And secondly, do you work with any specific trainers? So I'll hand over to you for those two questions. Thank you, Jasmin.
There is, an answer to the first question, there is a shorter version of the spine. It's called the Spine Challenger, which basically runs not quite half. It runs to checkpoint 2 of the spine, essentially in horse. So yeah, there's that. And my friend holds the record for that, Jim Mann. And then there's a what was this? And I'm just trying to think what the second part of the question was. Got distracted then. So I might have to pass over to you to remind me what the second part of the question was. Oh no, I remembered. Trainer. So yes, I do have a coach called Damien Hall. He's also he's a very successful ultra runner himself, and he I didn't have a trainer until the spine race. Essentially, when I was training for that race, I asked Damien to train me, partly because it was added incentive to train, like, I guess being accountable to somebody was added incentive to get out of the door in the morning and train. And for me, that's been as much of a kind of advantage of having a coach as being coached itself. It's just being accountable to someone, because it's so hard to make time to do it when you've got 2 small children. So yeah, he still trains me, Damien Hall. So that's it, back to you.
Brilliant, thank you. Last question relates to Manchester High. In your talk, you talked about how Manchester High had given you a real love of learning, which inspired you in part to go on to your job as a vet as well, and your love of extracurricular activities and using the pool, etc. You know, to have achieved what you've achieved, what do you think Manchester High has given you, which has maybe helped you along your path? Thank you.
Yeah, so and I guess I could have maybe included a slide, but it's quite nice to finish with it like this. So I think Manchester High is, well, apart from, you know, looking back, I think I knew it at the time, but looking back, I realised it even more just how fortunate I was to go to a school like that. I think that it really I think that to do what I've done now, I think you have to have a certain self-confidence and a belief in yourself. As I said, I do think that I'm not unique in having been able to do this. I think other people could do it as well. It's just that I tried, and I believed that I could do it. And I think that, you know, that came through my upbringing and through my schooling. And I think that Manchester High has a great ability to inspire people with confidence and self-belief. It gives you the opportunities to kind of explore your capabilities, your talents, and also nurtures that as I say, that self-belief, which I think is you're halfway there once you believe in yourself. So I think, yeah, and I think it's a great thing, inspiring that in women in a world where it can be easy to sort of hide away and as I say, get overshadowed potentially in a world such as ultra running, which is generally men dominated by men. So hopefully that sort of answered the question. Yeah.
Amazing, that's fantastic, thank you. Can I just say it's been a real honour and a privilege, Jasmin, to have you speak at our Founders Lecture this evening. You've really inspired us with your stories, and it's so wonderful for you to talk about how Manchester High inspired you, and you look back with such incredibly fond memories of your time at school. So thank you so much, and I really hope that we can meet actually in real life in school very, very soon. So thank you so much for being with us this evening, and for everybody on the call, thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed Jasmin's talk as much as I have this evening. So thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.